business as usual are taking the tough steps, like governors, mayors, county commissioners, families are making this very moment. Our governor in Alabama announced a 15% reduction in spending in the general
Senator
fund.
from Alabama's time has expired.
I thank the chair, and he's in 15% reduction, and I would just note that this $61 billion doesn't come close to that. 1 or 2% of total government spending is being reduced. I thank the chair and would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about the decisions we need to make about cutting spending, decisions we need to make now. The Congress and the White House haven't agreed on how much spending needs to be cut or where the cuts need to come from, but at least we can all agree that spending does need to be cut. Republican and Democratic administrations and Congresses for decades have continually increased federal spending. Change is hard, and it can be painful. That's because we have lots of ideas for great programs that would really help people out. But it's absolutely essential that our spending habits take a 180-degree turn starting right now. Tonight at midnight, the government will shut down if Congress doesn't pass a continuing resolution. This situation can be avoided if decisions are made in the next several hours. The House approved a temporary plan yesterday to fund the government for another week while a longer-term deal was worked out. That plan also funds our military through September. It includes language that Democrats have approved in the past and the President has signed. But the full Senate, all senators, Democrats and Republicans alike, have not been allowed a chance to vote on it. In the Senate, we don't always agree on every line included in a given bill, and we don't get a chance to vote on every line included in a given bill. But I will venture to say that most of us can agree on some of them. I think we can all agree that a government shutdown is not an outcome that anyone wants. The bottom line is that talk's cheap, and it's time to stop talking about passing a continuing resolution and take action. Actually, it's action that should have happened last September. Then we could be working on the next year instead of the last year. The House-passed bill gives us such an opportunity. It's the only bill that provides funding for the troops, funds the government, and continues the practice of cutting spending. We're in this position because we do not have a budget from last year, and we do not have completed funding bills for the current fiscal year. The current fiscal year started last October 1st. Not January 1st, last October 1st. And we're supposed to get that finished up in September so that agencies know what they're going to be spending for the next year beginning October 1st. Now, short of that, what they get to spend is 1/12 of what they spent the previous year. You know, this year we haven't had nearly the pressure to get a budget done that we've had in previous years. But it's easy to know why. The previous year, the spending increased by 18%. So they get to continue that 8% this year until we do something about it. It's far too late to do what we should have done last September. We've already had 6 months of additional spending, which makes it a little tougher at this time of year because any spending cuts have to be taken out of their total year's revenue beginning now. So a 50% decrease in a budget for something eliminates their funding because it has to make up from the rest of the year. I'm an accountant, so I shouldn't try and explain things like that. I should stick on message here, I guess, and say that I'm especially concerned about our men and women in uniform who are putting their lives on the line for this country. They'll be paid despite the shutdown, but their compensation shouldn't have to be delayed. They don't hesitate to defend this country, and we shouldn't hesitate to return that loyalty. I strongly support efforts to make sure military personnel and their families are paid without delay if the government shuts down. I'm hearing from service members and their families in Wyoming. They're worried about paying their rent, paying their bills, feeding their children. Some have recently been transferred and are dealing with the expense of moving their families across country, or in some cases back to the United States. They don't know where the back pay will come from and aren't sure what to tell their landlords or their banks. They want and deserve answers. Now, for some time, we've been talking about reining in spending and making sure that our grandchildren aren't saddled with the enormous debt this country is facing. What we need to do in Washington is live within our means. We haven't been doing that, and it shows. We have a $14 trillion deficit, and it's growing daily. Does anybody know what a trillion is? Tell you a good start. Write the 14 out there and put 12 zeros after it. It's a whole different number than 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000. And I saw a kid with a T-shirt that said, "Please don't tell them what comes after a trillion." They're worried about it, and they should be. We should all be worried about it. This year we're going to take in $2 2/10 trillion. That's a lot of money. We're going to spend $3 7/10 trillion. Imagine if you're a person that makes about $67,000 a year and you spend $100,000 a year, each and every year. Where are you going to get the money? Well, for a while you could probably borrow it. That's what we've been doing. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. That's the only way we can stay afloat. 40 cents of every dollar. See, just the interest on what we owe is $616 million a day. A day. We're haggling over $61 billion in cuts. That would fund the government's interest. The government's interest for 100 days. A drop in the bucket. But we've got to start sometime, and the best time to start is now. You know, yesterday Britain raised their interest rates 1/4%. That's not much. Do you know what happens if our bonds go up 1/4%? We're spending $240 billion with a B dollars a year on interest. If it goes up by 1%, we're going to spend another $140 billion a year on interest. It doesn't buy military, it doesn't buy schools, it doesn't buy anything but interest. And it goes to other parts of the world. Some of it's not to our friends. That would be $35 billion that if it just goes up 1/4%. $35 billion just in increased interest. If it goes up a whole percent, it's $140 billion. So what we've been talking about is going back to 2008 levels of spending plus inflation. You know, I've been talking to the Wyoming folks that have come out here. March is the big month for people to come to Washington because they all come out for their special programs to make sure that we know how important they are. Of course, one disappointment that I always have is they think that each one of those programs gets a vote. They don't. By the time it gets here, what we get to do is vote for a package that cuts spending or sometimes a package that increases spending. We don't even get to vote on one that keeps spending neutral. And the condition we're in, we've got to be voting for this one that cuts spending, whatever one it is that happens to get to us. And yes, that is going to inflict some pain on some programs that each of us feel is extremely important. It will affect families. It will affect people. But that's what happens when you get so delayed in outlining what you're going to pay that you're 6 months late on outlining it. If you were paying your own bills and you were 6 months late paying them, what would your creditors say? They'd be a little upset. That's where we are. We're that far behind. It is a dilemma, how to fund the government so that it pays within its means. But we're going to have to do that. Now, when I explain where we are and what we have to do and talk about going back to 2008 levels, I've been real pleased that the Wyoming people have said, well, we can live with that. Hopefully we don't have to go below the 2008 levels. Well, if we were really being serious about it, we would. But that's where we're talking about going, is the 2008 levels. So that's what we're facing today. The budget forecast for the future is troubling if we make changes now, and dire if we do not. And with Americans across the country tightening their belts, it's time for the federal government to do the same. Folks in Wyoming do understand this concept. The state, our state, is required, and many states are required to operate under a balanced budget. And that doesn't mean borrowed money in order to balance the budget. That means spending less than the revenues that you get in any given year. And Wyoming is one of the few states that are still operating in the black. Now, we noticed that there was a problem, and I really want to congratulate Senator Conrad and Senator Gregg for getting together a deficit commission bill. And we got a lot of co-sponsors on it, and we had a vote on it, and we didn't have the 60 votes here that were necessary to do it. But I applaud the President for picking that up and appointing a deficit commission. And I think he had two great co-chairs. He had Alan Simpson, former senator, and Erskine Bowles, who was the chief of staff for President Clinton. And they joined with 16 other people to figure out how to get out of this morass. And they came up with a plan, a good plan. Now, their 18-member commission had to have 14 members in favor of it before they could actually put it into a forced vote for us. And they didn't get that. They came close, but they didn't get that. Of course, I would have liked them to have broken that down, promised that they would do all 6 parts, but break it down into 6 different parts because different people objected to different parts. And there'd have been plenty to pass each part, and we may have to do that in order to get the same thing done here on the Senate floor. And I hope that we will pursue that. We need to pursue that. It's an absolute must. Now, the President did the right thing appointing the commission, but we had the State of the Union speech this year, and I really thought he would take what the commission said and make it clear to the United States. The President's very good at making things clear, and they gave him a blueprint to make clear. And I think everybody in the United States would have understood. In fact, I think a lot of the people in the United States understand even without the explanation. They know that if you spend more than you take in, you're going broke. And we've been doing it so long that we're $14.6 trillion broke. So he had another opportunity, which was the budget. And I really hoped that his budget would reflect what the Deficit Commission said. Well, one of the things that I found was he took some of the savings in tax expenditures that could have resulted in some lower tax rates to increase our international competitiveness, and he spent it on new programs. As I mentioned before, everybody's got ideas for new programs, and a lot of them are really good ideas, and they really would have an impact. But we're not even able to afford the programs that we already have. Now, I want to laud Senator Coburn for joining me and asking for a review of duplicative programs. And in one department, we found $10 billion worth of duplicative programs. That's not fraud, waste, and abuse. That's people doing the same things as everybody else. I know from working on education that in preschool we have 69 different preschool programs that receive almost as much money as all of kindergarten through high school from the federal government. There's a review on which ones are effective and which ones aren't, but we don't ever do anything with the ones that aren't. We're going to have to start doing that. But what several of my colleagues and I have suggested is this going back to funding levels enacted in 2008 before the economic stimulus bill became the baseline for government spending. So it's time to start making the tough choices. If we don't make cuts now, all the scenarios down the road are worse than what we're facing today. Let's stop the partisan banter and concentrate on the job we're here to do. The current discussions between the Congress and the White House are the beginning of America's journey back from the brink of financial ruin. This is the first of many budget engagements. Democrats and Republicans are playing chicken and neither is swerving. There may be a collision tonight, but in the end, amongst the wreckage, smoke, and scattered debris, I know that America has to be the one left standing. We can make it easy or we can make it hard. We do need to focus on getting a long-term funding bill passed for the remainder of the fiscal year. Not just the next 5 days, the remainder of the fiscal year. Time is running out in that year. Now, if we can get this done, we can start doing the real work. That's focusing on the nation's solvency for future generations. Senator Conrad, who's the chairman of the Budget Committee, has said he's not going to start on the next year's budget until we finish this year's appropriations. I think that probably makes sense, so you know how much money there is left over. But wait a minute, there isn't any money left over. We're overspending. Oh, well. As a grandpa, I do want to get this done so my grandchildren and children across the state of Wyoming and across the nation aren't stuck with the consequences of our inaction. I hope that everyone here hopes that they never have to answer to any of their grandchildren why they had a chance to fix it and they didn't. I don't think that'll happen. I think we'll reach an agreement. I hope it's done tonight. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I'd share a few thoughts, and if any of my colleagues come to the floor, I'd be pleased to yield to them. Mr. President, I indicated earlier pretty firmly that I thought our Democratic colleagues didn't recognize the severity of the crisis we're facing and weren't willing to confront the reality that we've got to change what we're doing. We don't have the money. When you're spending $3.7 trillion and taking in $2.2, and there's no real prospect of any alteration of that trajectory, something's got to change, just like everybody doing and states are doing. But one of the things that's galling to me, frankly, is that not only are they resisting taking any action to change the trajectory in any significant way, they're going about to savage criticize good and decent people who are calling for change, people who pay their salaries. They're labeling the millions of Americans who took the streets during the last election, went door to door, or had town meetings or rallies or protests, who wrote letters to Congress, wrote letters to the newspaper, called into radio programs, and said, we don't like what's going on in Washington. They're labeling those people who participated, many of them, in politics for the first time in their lives because they were worried about America, as extremists, radicals, blind ideologues, basically with no common sense. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's fair. I think every expert that we have had testify before the Budget Committee has said the same thing. You're spending this country into oblivion, Congress. Mr. President, you need to submit a budget that gets us off this path. It needs short-term spending reductions and long-term plans to deal with the surging instability in our large entitlement programs. And you need to get busy now, and if you don't get busy now, things will be worse. And you will make change. You know what Chairman Bernanke of the Federal Reserve said to the Budget Committee not long ago? He said that the Congressional Budget Office has projected the debts out over 10 years and how it's going to happen. But he said, basically, don't worry, it's not going to get there. Because you're going to have a debt crisis before you get there, and you're going to have to make changes in the midst of a financial crisis, the worst possible time to make those choices. So these men and women, whether they're in the Tea Party or not, who express their concerns about America are good people. They've been using the phrase that I thought interesting that Pete Domenici, former senator from New Mexico, former chairman of the Budget Committee, now participated with Alice Rivlin in a plan to deal with our damaging, dangerous deficit. Pete said, I've never been more afraid for my country. Never been more afraid for my country. And that's the heart and soul of the people who stood up in this last election, who concerned about their country, and it's the establishment that go along, the no change, the people in denial, that we can't cut spending, somehow it will never work, no matter what we do won't make any difference. So, Mr. President, I thank the Chair. I see my colleagues here, and I will be pleased to yield the floor. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
I ask we vitiate quorum call.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today to add my voice to those who have spoken on this chamber floor this afternoon to express frustration and concern about where we are as our federal government seems to be moving inexorably towards a shutdown this evening. As I've worked hard with my staff here in Washington and at home to help them prepare for and explain to the people who I represent what's going on here and why, I have struggled. I have genuinely struggled to understand why this impasse is leading, I think now inevitably, towards a government shutdown. I still remain hopeful that we will be able to find some resolution in these last few hours, but I think it's critical that the people of the United States understand the consequences of a government shutdown. This isn't just about sending home federal employees. This is going to have a significant impact on our economy, on our recovery, on working families all over this country, and I think on our reputation around the world. At a time when many of us are standing up and saying the United States, our system of democratic capitalism, is a model that other nations should follow. Our inability as a body, the House and Senate working together to reach a responsible consensus on what we all agree is one of our top priorities, is profoundly frustrating to me. I was elected by the people of Delaware and sent here to deal with three things: to try and get our private sector going again, creating high-quality, good jobs for the people of Delaware and our country; to deal with our significant deficit and our dramatic national debt and the very real challenge to our future posed by them; and to try and do it in a responsible and balanced and bipartisan way. And in my view, at this point, in this budget fight, from everything I've been able to hear from the press and from the leadership of my party here in this body, it has stopped being about cutting the deficit and has instead turned into a fight about ideology. If I understand correctly, as of last night at the end of the negotiations, they'd moved from having 60 riders, so-called, on the bill that would fund the federal government for the rest of the year, being down to just one or two. Now, I thought one of the good things that came out of the 2010 election was a broad-based focus, particularly by some in the Tea Party, but lots of folks in our country who were upset with how Washington works, a broad-based focus to stop having bills that were loaded up with lots of riders and lots of extraneous things, and to try and have common-sense legislation that's easy to understand and that does what it's meant to do. Well, this, as I understand it, is no longer about the deficit and about the budget. We are not being asked to consider whether or not we should cut $70 billion or $72 billion or $78 billion. We are instead being asked to agree to defunding Title X. Title X, a program that goes back to 1970, Mr. President, was enacted into law, signed into law by President Nixon, and provides a remarkable range of health services to women all across this country. In my state of Delaware, there are 26 community health centers that are funded by Title X. Just 5 of them are affiliated in some way with Planned Parenthood. And I just wanted to come to the floor and take a moment and focus on what Title X funds: preventive health services, contraceptive services, pregnancy testing, but also screening for cervical and breast cancer, screening for blood pressure, anemia, diabetes, basic infertility services, health education, and referrals out to social services. I know and have visited several of these community health centers in my state. They provide tremendous services to folks who otherwise have no access to high-quality, modern health care. And if I really understand correctly, that what's happened in this body is that we've come down to being willing to shut down the entire federal government over this one issue of ideology, I am embarrassed and ashamed on some level that we can't get this resolved. As I understand it, the folks who came to Washington seeking aggressive deficit reduction and spending cuts in this fiscal year have achieved virtually all of their objectives. I think the initial goal was $100 billion. And my understanding, as you heard as well, Mr. President, today in our caucus lunch, was we've agreed to up to $78 billion in spending cuts in this fiscal year, across the board from lots of different sources, from domestic discretionary as well as other programs that can be cut in this year. And that's a hard concession for folks who support government action in our community and our society to accept. But I think one of our challenges is for the folks who may be on the other side of this debate to hear yes, to accept that we've come almost 80% of the way to meeting their initial goal, and to instead recognize that I think this has long since turned into a fight over ideology, over the narrow issue of women's health. Let me give you one last example, if I can, of what this really means in my hometown. My Senate office in Delaware and I have been working hard for several months to follow on the example of my predecessor in this seat, Senator Ted Kaufman of Delaware, and host a job fair. Monday from 9 to 4 at the single biggest public space in Delaware, the Riverfront Arts Center, we're going to host a job fair. And we've got more than 50 employers lined up and ready to interview people. We expect more than 1,000 out-of-work Delawareans to show up, resumes in hand, ready to be interviewed, hopefully, and to be hired. But if I understand the rules right, if the federal government shuts down tonight, my staff can't carry out this job fair on Monday. Job one for me, and I think job one for all of us in this chamber, is helping our private sector, helping small businesses, helping our communities connect good jobs with the folks who are out of work and seeking employment. Fortunately, in our case, we've scrambled and worked hard the last few days. The Governor of Delaware, our Department of Labor, the Delaware Economic Development Office, other volunteers have stepped up, and they're going to work hard to make sure this job fair comes off Monday just fine without interruption. But we need to be focused on reining in the deficit and the debt, dealing with our long-term budget, and getting folks back to work. It is my hope, Mr. President, in conclusion, that as a body, that we can come together in a common-sense way. If we need to have a vote on the floor, if we need to have a fight about access to health care for women in Title X, let's have that debate. But this should be a discussion today about the deficit and about funding the operation of the federal government for the year ahead. I look forward and hope we can turn back to that very real work and not instead have a fight about ideology and access to women's health. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. President, first of all, I want to compliment my good friend Senator Coons from Delaware for something he has done just recently, along with Senator Isaacson as the chairman and the ranking member of the African Subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They have responded to my request to have a hearing on the tragedy, the things that are taking place right now in Cote d'Ivoire. But let me mention there's only one thing I take issue with, the letter that's gone out to make the request. One sentence, I'm going to read it, Mr. President. It says, Mr. Gbagbo has sought to forcefully thwart the will of the Ivorian people, and his forces, reportedly including mercenaries, have targeted innocent civilians, including women, as well as United Nations missions. I only want to get into the record. I've already done this. I've given 3 very lengthy speeches about what's happening over there. I've been there, I'm sure, more than any other member of the United States Senate. And I would just say that if you read The Guardian, the British Guardian, in there, I'm quoting now, they say the UN, 2 big slaughters have taken place, one in a small western town called Duquay and the other in Abidjan, the capital. In Duquay, said the UN mission and traditional hunters known as Dozos fought alongside Ouattara's forces. Let's keep in mind who we're talking about here. The president, who has been now for the last 10 years, has been President Gbagbo, Laurent Gbagbo, and the person who had run against him 10 years ago and then this time was declared to be winning the election is Alassane Ouattara. Anyway, they're talking about Ouattara in this case. He said the mission alongside with Ouattara's forces took part in killing 330 people in the western town known as Duquay. Then the Red Cross weighed in, and they came in with a new count. They said that they were responsible for 800 who had been killed. And just recently, and I certainly want my friend from Delaware to know this, I have talked to close friends of mine who are in Abidjan now. Abidjan is where the really bad things are happening. I would hope that anyone who questions the fact that it's the Ouattara's forces that are creating the problems in Abidjan, access my website, pull up the YouTube that was taken of what happened on what I call Black Monday, Monday night, when they went out with helicopters and they mowed down thousands of people. We don't have a death count of just how many people have been murdered in the last 5 days. Now, this could not have been the former president, or maybe he is still the president. In fact, he is, since he has not been replaced. President Gbagbo. It is factual that he had no one in the field. So as of an hour ago, I've had reports that these forces, the Ouattara's forces, are going around knocking on doors and murdering people, stealing everything in the houses, then burning them down. And yet no one can go out and even move bodies out of the streets because they'll get shot by snipers. President Gbagbo's people, no, he didn't have anybody there. He's hunkered down in the basement trying to save the lives of himself and I think 15 of his relatives, along with his wife Simone, that are down there. So I only want to say, while I'm very happy we're going to have the hearings, it's going to be necessary. I have witnesses. I have one witness whose name is Mel Teodoro. Mel is actually the head of the opposing party to Gbagbo. He's the one who actually ran against him for president one time and lost. He's the one who is currently a parliament member, and yet he is defending him, saying that he is the one who is right in this case and they stole the election. So all this stuff needs to come out, and it will come out, and I appreciate it. Let me just make one comment in the short time that we have here. I'm equally troubled. I try to explain to people back in my state of Oklahoma how all these billions or trillions of dollars we talk about really affects people who pay the taxes. In fact, during the time that we spent on the floor trying to defeat the efforts of the EPA in their cap-and-trade efforts, the cost that is put on there is somewhere between $300 and $400 billion. What I do, and I recommend, particularly some of the new senators, it works very well back home, count the number of tax returns that families file in your state. And then do the math. In that case, that would have cost, if they had been able to continue, and right now they're trying to continue, or if any of the legislation that had passed cap and trade, that would have cost each family that files a tax return in my state of Oklahoma $3,100 a year. Now, you start equating that now to some of the numbers that have been floating around. It's just, I remember so well coming down here, standing at this podium in 1995, when Bill Clinton was President of the United States. He came out with his budget for fiscal year 96, I think it was, and it was a $1.5 trillion budget, and I was outraged. I said, we can't do that. It's not sustainable. $1.5 trillion. And yet this last budget from the Obama administration has deficits that are higher than $1.5 trillion. In other words, the deficits are higher than the amount it took to run the entire country of the United States of America in 1996. And it's something that everybody knows is not sustainable. We know, we look at these large numbers, and we know it's going to be difficult. My major concern as the second-ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee is our troops. We have an opportunity right now to do something with our troops, to help them, to keep them funded. This offer that's come over from the House, I think is good. You know, I opposed the last three that came over. This one I'm supporting. And why? Because not only does it have cuts, but also, only 7 days, I understand that, but it takes the innocent defense and all of our troops over there in harm's way out from under all this foolishness that's going on the floor of the Senate now, and funds them through the rest of the fiscal year. Now, it funds them at a low level. I have to say this, with all the high spending that's come out of the Obama administration, DOD funding has remained level the whole time, while the rest of the funding averages an increase of 25%. So they've already taken the hits. Let's at least make sure that we can make the payroll, that we can support our troops, and to do that, we can take up the House bill and pass it. It's only for 7 days. Somebody doesn't like it, they can try something else, but at least it takes care of our military. So I hope that we'll do it. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from New Hampshire is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I agree with my colleague from Oklahoma. I don't think there's a single senator in this chamber who doesn't recognize that we've got to deal with the debt and the deficit this country's facing. But the reality is we are not going to deal with that on the 12% of the budget that's non-defense discretionary spending. We've got to look at mandatory spending. We've got to look at tax reform. And we need to do it in a thoughtful way that recognizes we need to invest in our future and make the cuts where we can do it without harming the future of this country. And, Mr. President, I'm really sad that we're here at the 11th hour on the floor of the Senate looking at a probable government shutdown at midnight tonight. You know, it didn't have to be this way. I was really disappointed to read accounts of some of our colleagues in the other chamber, on the other side of the Capitol, who are literally applauding when they were told that a government shutdown was coming. Well, the people of my home state of New Hampshire aren't applauding. They don't want a shutdown because they know that a shutdown of the federal government is bad for the country, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for the people of New Hampshire. Let me begin by going over some of the things that are going to happen in New Hampshire if the government shuts down. You know, I've spoken before, Mr. President, about companies in my home state of New Hampshire who are affected by our inability to get a budget done. Companies like Velcro USA. Now, I think we all know what Velcro is. I'm proud to say that it's produced in New Hampshire. It was invented in New Hampshire. And the United States military is a major customer for Velcro. It's a major customer of the company Velcro USA because Velcro is used in soldiers' uniforms and equipment. Normally, the government is a steady customer of Velcro USA, but now they've been waiting for months for the government, for us in Congress to pass a full-year funding bill for the government. A shutdown will mean increased uncertainty for the company and for the hundreds of employees who work there. We heard from another company in my home state, a small, innovative, high-tech company, that has said even the smallest shutdown is going to have dire effects. They said that they will lose 95% of their revenue if we have a shutdown. Now, this is a small business. They've got about 45 employees. But it's a business that has a lot of growth potential. It's exactly the kind of innovative company that will keep America's economy competitive. They were planning to hire 16 people this year, so increasing their workforce by about a third. But that's going to be put on hold if we have a government shutdown. And then there's the housing market. In New Hampshire and across the country, it's still very fragile. It's probably the slowest to recover sector of our economy. In New Hampshire, foreclosure rates are down 12% from a year ago, but they're still at historic highs. FHA home loan guarantees have been critical to recovery in the housing market. But again, all of that is going to stop in a shutdown. No new FHA loans could be approved. If you have a closing schedule, if you're trying to buy a foreclosed home or any home with FHA help, the deal is off, or at least it's going to be on hold. With all of the problems that have been caused by the housing crisis, we should not be hamstringing one of the most effective programs we have for assisting homeowners, and that's what we're going to do if there's a government shutdown. A shutdown would also close the Small Business Administration's lending programs, and we all know how important working capital is for small businesses and that that's still a problem. And then, of course, there are the 7,400 federal workers in New Hampshire. That makes the federal government one of our state's largest employers. And they don't know when paychecks are going to start again. They don't know if they're going to get any of their back pay. Their salary isn't just important for them and for their families, but these 7,400 hardworking New Hampshire citizens are critical to their local economies. When their pay stops, they stop making their mortgage payments, they stop paying their utility bills, they stop shopping at their local stores. And these are just some of the effects of a shutdown on the economy in my state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a small state, but if we multiply these economic impacts across our entire country, this shutdown carries the real risk of undermining our fragile economic recovery. And why is this happening? We have an agreement, pretty much, on how much we're going to cut in spending, and in fact, the Senate has gone more than 50% towards meeting the House in the cuts they want to make in the budget. This is not about how much money we're going to cut from the budget. This is happening because we have a small minority in Congress who wants to use the federal budget to prevent women from having access to family planning and other reproductive health care services. My colleague, Senator Coons, talked very eloquently about what Title X does. Title X funding provides reproductive health services to women who otherwise couldn't access those services. That includes contraceptives, screenings for sexually transmitted diseases, screenings for breast and cervical cancer. It provides preventive care for women who, in so many cases, in New Hampshire and across this country, would not be able to get access to that health care. In New Hampshire, we have 28 clinics who receive Title X funds. That includes community health centers, health department clinics, and hospital outpatient clinics, as well as Planned Parenthood. This fight is not about reducing our debt. It is time now to put ideology aside, to work together in a bipartisan way, to get this budget back on track and passed, so the people of this country can be confident that we're going to continue the economic recovery that has started and make sure we can put people back to work and support the small businesses and the people of this country who depend on the work we do here in Washington. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. President, before the distinguished senator from New Hampshire leaves the floor, I'd like to commend her on a number of things, but most importantly, her hard work with me and many others on the biennial budget bill, which we hope will come to the floor of the Senate in the not-too-distant future. And I want to make a comment because this potential shutdown, which I hope does not happen, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But with this potential shutdown, we've been speculating or asking the agencies to speculate on what does that mean. And if you read yesterday's Washington Post, you saw that the only agency of the government that will work seamlessly through a shutdown without any shortcoming or any deficiency is Veterans Health Care. That's because we biennially appropriate for Veterans Health Care. The one thing that will be open during this shutdown is the one thing we do in a 2-year process rather than a hit-and-miss process like the current Appropriations Act. So the distinguished senator who was governor of a state that has a biennial budget and Appropriations Act and has worked with it knows what I know, that if you can plan and make things predictable, you actually save money, improve the quality of your service, and hopefully we can get this country to a position where we do biennially appropriate and we spend one of every 2 years doing oversight to find waste and find new ways we can do things better and hopefully less expensive. So I just wanted, I'll yield.
My colleague from Georgia yield for a question.
Certainly.
I appreciate your kind remarks, and don't you think that if we had that biennial budget process in place right now, that we would not be here on the floor of the Senate debating whether we're going to have a shutdown, that we would have a budget process that was going forward, and as you point out, we'd have next year to provide oversight and accountability on that budget, and we'd have the dependability and the certainty that businesses and the people of this country are looking for?
There's no question that the senator is correct, and what we need to, we are predictably unpredictable as a body right now, and today is a good example. We need to become predictably predictable when it comes to the efficiencies that we can bring about, how we spend our money. We need to do what the American people do. They sit around their kitchen table, they prioritize what they've got in and what goes out, and they balance their budget because they have to. It's about time we put the constraints on ourselves to have the same discipline the American people have. And I again thank the distinguished senator.
I thank the senator from Georgia for your leadership on this issue.
I thank you. You know, in the South, we have an old saying, if you find yourself at the bottom of a hole, stop digging. Well, we're at that point. You know, we have accomplished some amazing things in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and I commend the House on the cuts that have taken place, but we ought to remember we're focusing on a minnow when the big fish is on the horizon. There's only so much you can cut when 50% of a fiscal year is gone. People are talking about how we're cutting out of small areas, but that's because that's about all there is to cut from. And I think the cuts have been good, and I think they've demonstrated to the American people that we can begin to get our house in order. But the big enchilada is coming up with the FY 2012 budget. And that's what we ought to get to as fast as we can. You know, Mr. President, I did a little research on what we've been doing the last 3 or 4 years, and in the last 3 years, we've spent all our money on omnibus appropriations except one Defense Appropriations Act. And in doing the research, we spent 4 days of debate on those 3 bills over the last 3 years and spent $10 trillion. 4 days of debate. We now have the small business bill, which has been on the floor of the Senate for 12 days, and we hadn't finished it yet. So we spent 12 days on the small business reform bill and over 3 years only spent 4 days on spending over $10 trillion. It is time that we got the current agreement, and I understand there is one, on how much we cut done. If we have some differences on policy, reserve those for the debates on the 2012 Budget Appropriations Act, and let's get moving. Everybody here knows we have 2 big votes on the horizon. One is a pending debt ceiling vote at sometime in May or June, and the other is the FY 2012 appropriation. We're not going to get a second chance on any of those. The world markets are not going to forgive us and give us another year to just spend our money in a helter-skelter manner. We've got the ability, and we've got the brain power, and we need the commitment in this body to spend money like the American people have to spend theirs. That's all they ask of us. But we don't need to be extravagant, we don't need to be frivolous, and we don't need to be wasteful. Another thing on the current pending, looming, possible shutdown is it is absolutely crazy when you've committed your sons and daughters to harm's way right now in 3 countries, Libya by the Air Force, Iraq, and Afghanistan, to put them in a position of accruing their income because we've shut a government down. That's just not right. That's not the right thing to do. We ought to be debating these things on the floor of the Senate with the government functioning. So I hope all of my colleagues will recognize that we're about to take victory, take defeat from the jaws of victory. We've won the battle on the short term with the cuts we needed. Let's get this short-term cut done. Let's get the CR done, and then let's get to the kitchen table of the American people and get it done for FY 2012 and the years ahead. We've got to find a way to pay back over time $14 trillion. That's going to take a lot of work, a lot of commitment, and a lot of timing. So let's get to it. Let's get this CR done. Let's come back next week and finish dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and then commit ourselves that the rest of this year is about America's future. It's about our children and our grandchildren. It's about beginning to rein in expenses and spend our money accountably and predictably so the American people can expect of us what we always demand of them. Mr. President, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Senator from Georgia for those very moving and powerful remarks. I would differ with him only in recognizing that that saying about digging the hole is not only a Southern saying, but I think by now it's a national saying, thanks to my Southern colleagues and others. Let me just say about this debate, it has been very eloquent on both sides, but there is an unreality to it. In the real world, Americans are struggling to find jobs or keep them, striving to stay in their homes, working hard to keep their families together. In the real world, economic growth has to be a priority, and we are on the verge of a failure of action that threatens the fragile economic recovery that right now is a priority for most Americans. And it is unnecessary. We are truly in danger of distracting ourselves from what should be the main task and the central reason that we should be seeking a budget here, which is to fund the federal government for the remainder of this year and assure that we continue economic growth and provide more jobs for the American people. There is agreement on the numbers, on the dollars, on the figures for spending in the remainder of this year. My colleague from Georgia has just confirmed what others have said on this floor repeatedly, what the majority leader said this morning. There is agreement on the cuts and the savings. The distraction is on an ideological war on women's health. A small minority
a very small minority, is holding this budget and this nation hostage in this ideological war on women's health. And that is a disservice to the American people who want us to go back to basics, jobs and the economy, get a budget done, avoid a shutdown that threatens that fragile recovery. Again and again on this floor, my colleagues have made the point that uncertainty and unpredictability are an enemy to the small businesses and large in this country and elsewhere in the globe who count on American leadership, count on our leadership in achieving a budget. This war on women's health care cannot be allowed to succeed. And I have spoken about it along with other senators who have spoken again on this floor, most recently the senator from New Hampshire, who has been a leader on this issue, along with the senator from California, Barbara Boxer, Senator Gillibrand, Senator Franken, Senator Lautenberg, Senator Mikulski, others who have spoken out in favor of Title X and Planned Parenthood funding. The unreality of this debate reflects a failure to appreciate what these dollars mean to the women who depend on these services. They are women who can't afford the kind of screening for cancer and cholesterol and other problems that is so vital to preventing those problems that cost us all larger dollars if they go untreated. These services are vital to the testing for other kinds of problems that may be more expensive to treat if they are not dealt with. And of course, contraception that prevents exactly the kinds of problems or issues that many in this body have focused on. In Connecticut alone, we're talking about more than 60,000 patients served by Planned Parenthood, including 30,000 Title X patients, 18 health centers that are imperiled by this rider or the conditions that would be attached, almost 100,000 preventive screenings and testing that are vitally important to low-income women and men who need access. The key is access to contraceptive services and preventive screenings, vital health care. There is a silver lining to this cloud. This moment is teaching us something. It is, in reality, a teaching moment. I think it will alert a lot of Americans to the importance of preventive services, testing, screening. If it draws one more woman or man to seek these kinds of testing services, it will have accomplished something. But the debate over these social issues will not be resolved in this budget and should not be resolved in the remaining few hours that we have left. There will be other occasions when we can debate and resolve these social issues, the ideological divides that have been with us for decades and will remain after this budget, hopefully, is resolved in the next few hours. My hope is that there will be other teaching moments, but most important, not only about health care, but about the way the democratic process works. In the short months that I've been privileged, and I deeply mean privileged, to be part of this body, and sometimes to preside in the very chair where the President is now, I've often looked around this chamber and seen the students and others who come to visit us and thought of the millions of Americans who are watching us and who hope that we will recognize that we have more in common than in conflict as Americans. Recognize that a shutdown of this government cannot happen consistent with our duties to seek what we have in common over what we have in conflict. That it would be devastating not only to American leadership around the globe, to the military men and women who are depending on our judgment and leadership, to the veterans, to the folks out there searching for jobs, trying to stay in their homes, keep their families together, recognizing that the reason they sent us here is to do what's right for this economy now and to reach agreement and to do those kinds of things that Americans do in their homes over that kitchen table when they disagree. They come together. They seek what they have in common. They don't walk out of the house. They don't shut off the lights. They stay together, and they do what they think will best serve the common interest, which is to recognize we have an agreement on the budget numbers. We cannot be distracted by the ideological war on women's health, and we should stay true to our principles. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.